Okay, so today we're going to talk about the properties of metals and nonmetals, which are a couple of categories of elements that show up on your periodic table. These different elements are grouped into these metals or nonmetals based on the properties that they have. So we're going to talk a little bit about properties of metals and nonmetals. First, let's talk about metals. When you look at your periodic table, the ones on the picture I'm showing you, the green ones are all elements that are metals. On your periodic table, you may want to take a color and lightly color in these elements and label it as metals so you can remember where they are on the periodic table. Any of these elements that would be shaded in green is considered a metal. And if it's considered a metal, it needs to show all of the properties that metals have. So what properties do metals have? Metals are going to be shiny in their luster, so you look at them, they're going to be pretty and shiny. Any element that is a metal will be malleable or ductile, which means that if you hit them with a hammer, they're going to flatten out. They're not going to break. Or if you, it basically is saying you can shape them into different shapes, which we know to be true of metals as we use metals to form a lot of different shapes. Metals are going to react with acid. They also will react with copper chloride. Metals conduct electricity. If you want to boil a metal, you're going to have to heat it up really high. Same if you want to melt a metal. So both a high boiling point and a high melting point. And most of the time when you find metals on Earth, they're going to be found in a solid state because of that high boiling point and high melting point. So yes, that's metals. Here's a picture of a couple metals. You can see they're shiny, they're shapeable. We shape them into jewelry, we shape them into tools, we shape them into a lot of different things that we need. The picture over here on the right shows metal reacting with acid. All these bubbles are forming because the acid is reacting with the metal. All right. Our next category is nonmetals. These are found on the right side of your periodic table. Again, might be helpful to grab a colored pencil, shade in these elements, pause the video and shade in these elements and label them as nonmetals. There's one nonmetal hanging out over here that doesn't necessarily follow the pattern. But again, all these nonmetals are grouped together on the periodic table because they're going to share similar properties. The properties of nonmetals are pretty much the exact opposite as the properties of the metals. So let's list them on the top of your sheet as well. Nonmetals, instead of being shiny like a metal, they're dull. Okay. They're going to be brittle. So if you hit them with a hammer, they'll break, they'll shatter into smaller pieces. If you try to react them with acid or copper chloride, they will not react. They do not conduct electricity, and they typically have very low boiling and melting points. Because of this, usually when you find nonmetals on Earth, they're going to be found in a gas state. That's not always true, but most likely. Okay? So here's a picture of a couple of nonmetals. This one over here on the left is sulfur. It's yellow, so you can see it's not shiny, it's considered dull. If you hit it with a hammer, it's going to shatter into little powder or little pieces. And it's also going to follow the rest of those properties. It's going to have a low boiling and melting point. Your last category of elements is going to be called metalloids. All right, and for these ones are found right between the metals and nonmetals. The reason why these are located here is because metalloids are going to have some properties of a metal and some of a nonmetal. So it might be shiny, but very brittle. Shiny like a metal and brittle like a nonmetal. It might be shiny like a metal, but not conduct electricity, which is more like a nonmetal. And here are some examples of different nonmetals that you'll see on Earth. The mixture of the properties isn't necessarily important, but if you ever come across an element that has even one metal property and the rest nonmetal, we consider that a metalloid. All right. So you should have the 3 columns filled in on the top of your note sheet now. And at the bottom, work through the examples. For each property, put a little M or an NM, M for metal and M for nonmetal, next to each property. If all the properties of an element are metal properties, then you can say that that element is a metal. If you write all nonmetal for all of the properties shown for an element, then that element would be considered a nonmetal. If you mark down all of the properties and some are metal and some are nonmetal, you would call that a metalloid. So go ahead and practice those. When you're finished with them, show your teacher. Good luck.